Imagine spending decades convincing everyone you won a battle when you were actually just trying to survive it. That's exactly what happened to me. For more than 3,000 years, people looked at giant temple walls covered with my victories and believed I crushed my enemies without breaking a sweat. The answer isn't as simple as the monuments would have you believe. And once you see what was left out, you'll never look at one of history's greatest pharaohs the same way. It all started with one campaign that I thought would make my name, but instead nearly ended it.
At 29, wearing the crown wasn't enough. My father earned respect on the battlefield. Now I had to prove myself. A palace wouldn't do it. I needed a victory to make every kingdom think twice before challenging Egypt. That victory was Kadesh. More than a city, it controlled vital trade routes, wealth, and regional influence. Capturing it would tighten Egypt's grip. Failure, however, would fuel my critics. I gathered 20,000 soldiers, split into 4 divisions, and marched north with arrogant confidence. Reports suggested the Hittite army was distant. It seemed too easy. That's always the first sign of impending disaster. Meanwhile, King Muwatalli II of the Hittites wasn't reacting. He was building his own plan. He studied my fighting style, my youthful ambition for quick victory. He waited for my inevitable mistake. Then 2 men appeared, claiming escaped from the Hittites. They insisted the enemy was far north, retreated. It was the news I wanted to hear. I believed them, marching straight into their trap. What followed wasn't just an ambush. It was the moment my entire campaign began to unravel. I reached Kadesh before the rest of my army did, and that was exactly what the Hittites wanted. My camp went up just north of the city, while 2 of my divisions were still miles behind, stretched out along the road. On paper, I had one of the strongest armies in the region. In reality, I had split it into pieces without even realizing it. Then everything changed in an instant. My scouts captured 2 Hittite soldiers who cracked under questioning. Their story was completely different. The enemy hadn't retreated at all. They were hiding just behind Kadesh, waiting for me. Suddenly, every report I'd trusted fell apart. Those 2 deserters who had guided me, they were spies from the very beginning. Before I had time to reorganize my army, thousands of Hittite chariots burst across the river like a stampede. These weren't the light, fast Egyptian chariots I was used to. They were heavier, packed with 3 warriors instead of 2, built to smash straight through enemy lines. Their target wasn't just my soldiers, it was my confidence, my camp, and any chance of keeping control. The first division they slammed into never stood a chance. Men scattered in every direction. Horses bolted. Officers shouted orders nobody could hear over the roar of charging chariots. What had started as a carefully planned campaign turned into complete chaos within minutes. And here's the part that rarely makes it onto the temple walls. This wasn't some heroic showdown I had planned. It was survival. My army wasn't charging forward in perfect formation. It was running for its life. The attack was bad enough, but what I saw when the Hittites reached my camp made things even worse. By the time the Hittite chariots crashed into my camp, it barely looked like a military camp anymore. Tents were collapsing, horses were tearing loose, supplies were flying everywhere, and soldiers were running straight through the camp. Enemy chariots were right behind them. If you've ever wondered what complete panic looks like, this was it. For a few terrifying moments, it seemed like the battle was already over. My officers were trying to rally the men, but fear spreads faster than orders. Some soldiers grabbed whatever weapons they could find. Others didn't stop running. Campfires were kicked over, wagons overturned, and expensive supplies became somebody else's treasure. Then came the strangest part of the whole battle. Instead of finishing us off, many of the Hittite warriors started looting the camp. They found food, gold, weapons, armor, and royal equipment. After breaking through our defenses so easily, they acted like the battle was already won. From their point of view, it probably was. That decision changed everything. Every minute they spent collecting treasure was another minute I had to pull myself together. They had all the momentum, but they traded it for loot. It's one of those moments in history where greed quietly walked onto the battlefield and completely changed the outcome. Meanwhile, I climbed into my chariot, knowing there weren't many options left. Running would probably save my life, but it would destroy my army and my reputation in one afternoon. Staying meant charging into an enemy force that outnumbered the men still standing around me. Not exactly the kind of decision you want to make before lunch. I had one chance left, and what happened after that is still argued over by historians thousands of years later. I looked across the battlefield and realized something didn't make sense. Hittite chariots broke into my camp, but they weren't pushing forward. They had stopped. At the time, I didn't know they were busy grabbing supplies and celebrating what they thought was an easy victory. I only knew one thing: they had given me a window, and it wasn't going to stay open for long, so I did the last thing they expected. Instead of retreating, I grabbed the reins, stood in my chariot, and charged straight toward the enemy. Later, official inscriptions would claim I fought almost single-handedly, scattering thousands of warriors like they were frightened sheep. It's an incredible story, maybe a little too incredible. Most historians believe I absolutely led a campaign that's supported by several ancient records. But did I personally charge through the enemy 6 different times, practically winning the battle alone? That's where opinions split. Many researchers think those details were exaggerated to make the king look larger than life. After all, admitting your army nearly collapsed isn't exactly the kind of headline you carve into 5 temple walls. Still, one thing is hard to ignore. My decision to attack bought even more time. The Hittites suddenly had to deal with resistance instead of helpless soldiers. Their neat plan was falling apart because their own troops had lost discipline. They came to destroy an army, but got distracted counting someone else's treasure. Funny how history can change because people couldn't resist free stuff. As the fighting grew more desperate, dust covered the battlefield completely. Nobody could see what was coming next, and that turned out to be the biggest surprise of the entire day. Just when it looked like everything was over, new banners appeared through the dust. Just when it seemed like the battle was slipping through my fingers, the battlefield changed again. Out of the dust came fresh troops. The Naran forces, allies who had marched on a different route, slammed into the Hittite flank almost out of nowhere. Not long after, another Egyptian division finally reached the fight. The Hittites expected to crush one isolated force. Instead, they suddenly faced soldiers from multiple directions. The hunters had become the hunted. The same chariots that stormed through my camp now fought their way back across the Orontes River. They were still dangerous, but the surprise was gone. Their attack had lost its momentum, and every minute that passed made it harder to finish what they had started. By sunset, something almost unbelievable had happened. My army was still standing. But let's be honest, that didn't mean I had one. Kadesh was still under Hittite control. I hadn't captured the city. Mu'at Ali hadn't wiped out my army either. After an entire day of brutal fighting, neither side had achieved what it came for. It wasn't the crushing victory Egypt would later celebrate, nor the devastating defeat the Hittites had planned. It was a bloody stalemate. Both armies were exhausted, wondering if another day of fighting was even worth it. The next morning, officers from both sides met to talk instead of charging back into battle. That's usually a good sign that nobody feels particularly confident about rolling the dice again. But here's where the story takes a turn almost nobody expects. The battle ended without a clear winner. ... Yet somehow, I managed to turn it into one of the greatest victories ever carved into stone. When I returned to Egypt, I had a problem. I hadn't taken Kadesh. I hadn't destroyed the Hittite army. If people only heard the facts, my first major campaign would sound like a close call instead of a glorious triumph. So I did something that rulers have been doing ever since I made sure my version of the story was the one everyone remembered. Soon, giant temple walls across Egypt were covered with scenes of me charging through enemy lines, while terrified Hittite soldiers ran for their lives. The famous poem of Pentuer described me as a king abandoned by his army who, with the help of the god Amen, fought back almost single-handedly. It makes for an incredible story. And honestly, if all you had were those inscriptions, you'd probably believe every word. Here's the interesting part. The poem wasn't the only record alongside it. Another inscription known as the Bulletin includes details that don't exactly scream perfect victory. It mentions the false intelligence that fooled my army. It acknowledges that one of my divisions collapsed. It even records that reinforcements arrived at the right moment. Those details don't erase my leadership, but they paint a much messier picture than the heroic version carved into the monuments. That's why so many historians see Kadesh as one of the earliest examples of political image management. I didn't have newspapers, television, or social media. I had something even better, Stone. Once your version of history is carved into massive temples all over the kingdom, it's pretty hard for anyone to argue with it. Well, unless they're archaeologists reading the fine print thousands of years later. Even now, scholars continue debating exactly how much of the poem reflects real events and how much was written to strengthen my reputation. Most agree I showed real courage during the battle. They also agree the victory was, let's just say, a lot more complicated than the monument suggests. But the most surprising part of the story didn't happen on the battlefield or even in Egypt. It happened years later, when two bitter enemies chose something neither had expected. 16 years after the dust settled at Kadesh, something happened that probably would have sounded impossible on the day of the battle. Instead of meeting on another battlefield, Egypt and the Hittite Empire sat down to make peace. After years of fighting over the same land, neither side had managed to force the other into submission. They had spent lives, money, and resources chasing a victory that never came. Eventually, they reached the same conclusion. Talking was cheaper than fighting. The agreement they signed became one of the oldest surviving international peace treaties ever discovered. It promised that neither empire would attack the other, that they would help each other against outside enemies, and even return fugitives. For something written more than 3,000 years ago, it sounds surprisingly familiar. And there was another figure, quietly helping behind the scenes. Queen. Historical records show she exchanged letters with the Hittite queen, Padoapa, as the relationship between the two empires improved. While kings earned glory on battlefields, these queens were helping build trust with words instead of weapons. Sometimes the people holding the pen change history just as much as the people holding the sword. The treaty's legacy didn't end in ancient Egypt either. Today, a replica of the Hittite version is displayed at the United Nations, where representatives from countries around the globe gather to settle disputes through negotiation. It's a fitting reminder that one of history's most famous battles is remembered just as much for the peace that followed as the fighting itself. Looking back, it's almost ironic. The battle I wanted everyone to remember wasn't the greatest thing to come out of Kadesh. The lasting achievement wasn't the clash of chariots or the stories carved into temple walls. It was the decision, years later, to stop fighting altogether. When I first marched toward Kadesh, I thought one great victory would define my legacy. Instead, I walked into a trap that nearly destroyed everything I had worked for. My army scattered. My enemies stormed my camp. For one terrifying morning, the future of Egypt hung by a thread. Yet thousands of years later, most people don't remember that close call. They remember the towering statues, the temple walls, and the fearless king charging into battle. That's the power of the story that survived. But if you read beyond the monuments, a different picture appears. You see a young ruler who made mistakes, adapted under unbelievable pressure, caught a lucky break when his enemy lost focus, then spent decades making sure history remembered the version that strengthened his throne. Maybe that's the real lesson from Kadesh. Winning isn't always about what happens on the battlefield. Sometimes it's about who tells the story afterward. And somehow, more than 3,000 years later, we're still talking about it.